Hi, well, I want to start out by thanking you for coming on here. I really appreciate it. I know, obviously, you've had a very busy week. Congratulations again on, your nomination for the UFC. Looks like we lost him. I'm going to try to call him back here. Darn Skype.
Hi, Michael. How you doing?
I'm doing great. The beauty of modern technology. Skype's only had like 20 years to get this down, right?
I did an interview yesterday with Mariano Mendoza, and they really wanted me to add Zoom. And I tried to add Zoom as an alternative to Skype, and they must have so many requests that I couldn't get the free invite accepted.
Oh, wow. That's...
And they were touting it as something better than Skype. Now, I've never had problem with Skype. In working with screenwriters who developed the screenplay on Is This Legal, I was on with them every week, in 3 different locations, and it worked out fine.
It's been pretty dependable for me for the most part. I've used that.
Sure.
I've also used Facebook Messenger, and it's been pretty dependable too. So, I mean, it's not perfect, but I will say, like I said, congratulations. But it's about damn time. What took them so long?
Well, I think that it was a matter of 25 years passing, and the company being bought by Endeavor, and now I think they're in a position where they feel they can, pay some attention to the past, not only in how they're doing business, but in what they present on Fight Pass.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something I'd like to talk to you about as we go on, because I think that they could do a lot more with that, and you probably help them with that some. Are you working with them on any level, or are they just kind of bringing you in, as showing off as the pioneer and creator of the sport?
Yeah, that's what it is at this point. I don't know if anything else will develop from it, but they've been very nice to me, treating me very well the last couple of weeks. I have a couple of real good friends over there, to be honest with you. One of them is in charge of the Hall of Fame and Fight Pass. So, like anything else, you wind up with some advocates. I ran into Mark Ratner when I was over there, and that was always a pleasure, because he and I go back to 1994.
Oh, wow. Yeah, he's great. From everything I've heard, great guy. I've never heard anybody say a negative word about Mark Ratner.
He really belongs himself in the Hall of Fame when he retires, because he was the guy who, as the vice president of government relations, who basically got their sanctioning throughout the 50 states and the 10 provinces in Canada.
Yeah, that was the hardest part of this thing, and obviously the way this thing started out, it turned some heads for the right reasons and the wrong reasons, and I'm sure many people have said this to you, and I'm sure that's probably your thought, but the way UFC 1 started out in the tournament and everything, I don't think it could have been done either way. I don't think it would have been what it was. I think that you had to do it exactly how you did it.
Well, that was my idea, was that you needed to be able to get beyond the one bout. That had been the experience in history of the process not being successful. Every time someone attempted to do a single bout mixed match, it flopped, because they'd argue about the money and they'd argue about the rules. And the success of what I was doing in promoting and selling was that it was a tournament, and you could draw from the rock plus all the martial arts, and it was a $50,000 first prize, and there were basically no rules, just no biting and eye gouging, and that goes to pancreation.
Yeah, is that where you originally got the idea, was pancreation, or when did you first start thinking about this?
Well, I like to tell a story that on on Monday, June 13th, 1964, I got my butt beat by a wrestler.
That will happen. Happened to me a few times in judo. I competed a little bit.
That was my seminal experience. I wrote about it. I was studying boxing. I was taking boxing lessons at the time, and I got and a couple of my buddies out of Davie went over to Bangkok.
Skype audio.
All right, let's try this. Hopefully, third time's a charm here. I've never had this issue before, but hopefully we worked out all the kinks. Like I said, hopefully third time's a charm, and that'll be. We'll be able to continue to go. It sounds like the audio is a little better. You were starting for some reason to cut out a little bit before, and but yeah, let's get back into this. We were talking about you got into a match with a wrestler.
And then my friends came back talking about a match they saw in Bangkok. So it was always on my mind. And at one point in the anti-agency business, I had done some research and discovered pankration, that it was in the Olympics for over 1,000 years. And we presented an idea to this client to do a tournament. And they looked at it and said, too violent, too expensive, and they passed. It was one of 3 or 4 things that I was presenting to this client. And but I was enamored of the idea. And I left the agency, got permission to take the file with me, because I had done this research with my secretaries, Joy. And before you know it, I took a job in Torrance, a couple of blocks away from the Gracie Academy.
That's well, I guess that was a really good turn for you, because of course you ended up working with Rory and Gracie. You were taking lessons for him, but a couple different things that ended up turning well from you, a couple people that you met during that time, right?
Well, it took me 1.5 years to get Rory really interested. He had been approached by so many people, and he'd never done business with anybody who wasn't Brazilian. But I finally won him over by volunteering to do the creative on an ad campaign to sell his videos. And when that turned out to be very successful, then I had his support on board. I needed to find a martial artist that was willing to fight other styles. You got to remember that if you were any good at the martial arts, you left it, you went into TV or movies, and if you were running a local school, you didn't challenge somebody on the other side of town, because if you did a public bout and you lost, it would cost you students. So I needed the Gracies on that level. And Rorion and his brothers, their history down in Brazil with their family, they had been involved in vale-tudo, no-holds-barred type fighting. And I saw a lot of improv matches in the back of their school. And that's, in fact, where I met fellow student, film director, and screenwriter John Milius.
And that's who you really needed, I know. And I know that it took you a little bit to get Rorion going on. For the people that don't know.
By the way, Michael, it's Rorion, pronounced with an H.
Thank you very much for the correction. Yeah.
Yeah, Portuguese is the R is pronounced as an H.
I should know that from Royce. I would have never called him Royce. I don't know why I did that. But yeah, Rorion, you. For those people that haven't heard the story, how you got him on board, you helped him out in selling some DVDs, right?
I had to what? Say that again, please.
You helped him out in selling some DVDs, right? You had to show him that you knew marketing.
Oh yeah, and when I was able to help sell the basics of Gracie Jiu Jitsu video series, now I had the credibility. Now he said, "What else are we going to do?" I said, "Well, we're going to do that tournament that I told you about 6 months ago." And he said, "Okay, how do we do it?" I said, "Well, we're going to set up a corporation in Colorado because there's a loophole in the law up there. We can do it up there." And I said, "We're going to raise some seed capital." He said, "How do we do that?" I said, "Well, I'm writing a business plan." And I wrote a 65-page business plan, and we presented it to about 6 dozen of our family and friends in the back of the academy one night. And I was able to sign up in the next 5 weeks 27 investors who gave us the seed capital necessary to move the idea forward. Then what I had to do is I had to get us a TV partner. And I approached HBO, Showtime, ESPN, Prime Ticket. Everybody basically turned me down. They all told me the same thing. The martial arts belongs in the movies or in video games, and it doesn't belong on network or cable. And the pay-per-view people told me that boxing and wrestling belongs on pay-per-view, but the martial arts had not been successful.
Yeah, and that's interesting. You talk about. I read in your book because I've read through your book. And just as a side note, I don't know if you have it available on audiobook, but I don't know if maybe there's something you want to look into because I think that might be a pretty big market. I looked for it at first on audiobook, wasn't able to find it, but then I downloaded it, of course, and read it. But
Thank you.
yeah, do you know? Do you have any plans for re-releasing an audiobook, or could I just not find it?
No, we're waiting for the film to be made, and my agent is looking then to bring the book to a bigger publisher.
Okay, yeah.
And when they bring it to a bigger publisher, that's when we'll study the book.
Okay, and then the other thing I wanted to talk about was there's been talks about a movie about this, and your publisher are you working on that at all, or is that just kind of, in slowly coming along as you get into the Hall of Fame? And
that's coming along very well at this point because we sold the rights to a major producer, and he brought on two very experienced and sophisticated writers, and the script was delivered to me last Friday. So the script is now in the hands of my producer's agent, who's William Morris, the owner of the UFC, and the writer's agents are over at UTA package, and they're now submitting it to actors and directors. So we're moving forward on that. It's a great script. Wow, they did an incredible job.
Wow, well, I'm really glad to hear that they're working on that for you. I'm really glad to hear that they are, that that WME is working with you more maybe than Zuffa was and things, because you definitely deserve it. I've said it before. I want to thank you not just for MMA, so many industries that this is built. I mean, I'm sure maybe you couldn't have even imagined what this would become, but so many millions of jobs and writers and everything. I mean, we really owe it all to, you and, Hori, and luckily he went along with you and everybody that came along for this ride. I can't imagine a world without the UFC now. I'll tell you, I was 14 years old when me and my best friend sat down, the first time it came out. And we had to rent it on VHS because the first few pay-per-views were not available in our small market. And I was into boxing and Bruce Lee at the time, and I swear when I seen it, it was like I got 10 Christmas presents and birthday presents all together. I just thought, this is just going to change the world. It was literally one of the most incredible days of my life, and I've enjoyed it and not lost really the passion for 25 years. So thank you for working so hard.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's always gratifying to me to run into people who it has impacted. I get the biggest kick out of wrestlers telling me, some of whom become major MMA stars and halls of fame, tell me that if I hadn't done what I did, they'd be an assistant wrestling coach at a small college.
Yeah, Absolutely. I think they're about 100% right. Can you tell the people out there, when did you know this was going to take off? Was there a moment where you said, "Hey, we broke through. That this is going to be big"?
Well, this was a quest, and in the beginning, a lot of the people we approached said no. But when we finally hooked up with the people who joined the quest, with me as the Pied Piper, then I think we were all convinced that this was going to be huge right from the very beginning. John Milius, as our creative consultant, said to me, Art, 20, 30, 40 years from today, there are going to be 50 million people watching this because this was big in history. It'll be big again. And when you think about it, other than soccer, the martial arts is the most ubiquitous physical activity on the planet. Every country has some version of it. So we knew early on, and so did Semaphore Entertainment, our TV partner, we signed a 5-year deal. That original joint development deal, which there's a copy of in the book, was a 5-year deal. This was not conceived as a one-shot. This was looked at as a franchise. We were going to do them many times a year, and the first go-around was for 5 years. So we weren't shocked when we did almost 87,000 buys on pay-per-view for UFC 1, Michael. And then UFC 2, we did almost 300,000 buys. And this was in a pay-per-view universe that only had about 33 million homes in North America with the box. Today, there are over 100 million homes that have the box in U.S. and Canada. So, to answer your question, we knew that first night. I remember going to the first after-fight party Friday night at McNichols Arena, and everybody was high and drunk. Everybody was excited. The fighters, they knew they had taken part in something unique. They were like, test pilots, and they were excited. The SEG people, we were all drinking single malt scotch and smoking Cuban cigars and patting ourselves on the back. We knew we had a hit. Monday, when we got the early numbers in, Semaphore Entertainment was ecstatic, and their funding source was BMG in Europe, Bertelsmann's music group. At that point, the largest privately held corporation in entertainment on the planet Earth. And suddenly, they who didn't come to the first UFC showed up in Denver for the second one, because we're doing almost 90,000 pay-per-views when everybody thought we might only get 30 or 40,000. Everybody knew it was a hit. There was no mystery at that point. And quite frankly, who made the UFC possible? The fans. People like you who saw it and said, wow, I got to see the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. And for people out there that don't know how big 300,000 is, like you said, it was only available in so many homes. There's UFC pay-per-views today in the last few years that have not hit the 300,000 buy mark, and it's in every home in how many countries now? I mean, so that's an astronomical number.
Well, the fans made this thing happen, and then during the dark years, 98 to 2001, it was the fans who kept it alive. They kept sharing it. They kept turning on their buddies about it. They kept they kept the fire burning, and the fans really made this thing. But I say that I was lucky. I was in the right place at the right time with the right plan, and there was a huge number of fans out there wanting to see some sort of a Kumite event. They, who was the best? A karate black belt, a judo player, a wrestler, a boxer. So there was this unfulfilled desire to see this product, and whoever could put it together and package it was going to have a hit. And I knew that my real job was to monetize the martial arts. Again, if you were any good at the martial arts, if you became famous, you went into TV and the movies, you became an actor. Bruce Lee did it. Chuck Norris did it. Steven Seagal, Jean-Claude Van Damme. By the way, the title of the book comes from Chuck Norris. When we went to his house and presented the idea and asked him to be there, maybe be a commentator, or just sit by the octagon, the only thing he kept saying was, "Is this legal? Are you sure this is legal?" He thought that the sheriff or the National Guard was going to show up, and he didn't want to be there. So he didn't.
That's great. He kind of knew, and I know as you talk about on your book, and I kind of remember watching that first UFC. Even Bill Superfoot Wallace, that first 24 seconds of violence in that first match, he almost looked like he didn't know what he'd gotten himself into, and he was supposedly, one of the greatest mixed martial arts out there. It looked like Brown was really enjoying himself, but Jim Brown. But yeah, Superfoot Wallace almost looked a little worried there for a little while.
Well, Bill was a contact karate guy. He was never a professional kickboxer, so he was in a sense over his head. You're right about the fact that the guy who really got it, and he made a comment which we used in the book, and it'll be in the movie. He said, "Tonight we've learned that what we thought was fighting isn't what we thought it was." Brown got it. Jim was a cool guy, a tough guy, and he, I think, summarized it all up for the fans in a pretty cool because, little Hoist Gracie at 175 pounds prevails over guys that outweighed him by, in some cases, 80, 50, 60, 80 pounds.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a genius move, and I think it's overlooked to get Jim Brown. How did you approach him, or did he approach you guys?
Well, it was my idea to bring in Kathy Long and Bill Wallace. They had been arguing in the martial arts magazines about whether or not women should be in combat sports. And that was my call. And quite frankly, looking back on it, it wasn't a great call. Semaphore called me up out of New York, our TV partner, and they were thinking about somebody outside the box as a color commentator, and they were the ones who proposed Jim Brown. And it was brilliant. It was a great idea. And Jim stayed with us for a number of shows. So later on, they brought Joe Rogan in UFC 12, and he's still with the franchise. But quite frankly, I got to give Rorion Gracie a lot of credit for picking his brother Hoist. I kept thinking all throughout the early spring and summer months of 1993 that we were going to get Rickson, the family champion. And for various reasons, Rorion decided not to go with Rickson. And later he said to me, it was really good to put in Hoist because he looks like a choir boy in that white gi, and he's not very big and intimidating. Rickson looks like a champion as soon as he walks into the octagon. Rickson used to impress everybody who ever met him. I used to take an exercise class with him on a Tuesday morning, and I could only last 20 minutes in that class. Me and a lot of the police officers from Torrance would drop out. We couldn't keep up doing one-legged squats.
I've heard some of the legendary workouts from that, and anybody that's on here, I know you've seen anybody that hasn't seen Choke after this, the Rickson Gracie thing. Great documentary, definitely recommend it. But also, I remember Hoist, he didn't carry himself, or at least, from what I seen, it didn't seem like he carried himself then the way that he does now. That seemed to almost build him into a different person. Maybe it's kind of like we've seen him grow up before our eyes.
Well, I think you're right about that. You have to remember when I met Hoist, he didn't have a car, he didn't have a bank account. He lived in a small room above the garage at Horion's house, and he had a roommate. He had a fish tank with two piranha, and he would come into Horion's office on a Saturday afternoon after he finished sweeping up the academy. And Rorion would open the safe and give him three $20 bills, and Hoist would hitchhike out to the beach and to do a little surfing, Redondo Beach. He'd get a bite to eat and he'd flirt with the girls. That was Hoist's life. He was 27 years old, and he was like really about 18 or 19 in emotional age. Winning the UFC was an enormous impact, and probably, but Hoist could tell you the full impact of what that meant, because I think it changed his life too. I agree.
Yeah. I think these guys just obviously they didn't know what to do with his art. I mean, you had this idea of we're going to find out the best art, and I've talked to guys, and I've kind of came up with this thing that one of the reasons that jiu-jitsu worked so great, and obviously it's more complicated. I think it's more than a sport than like boxing. It's better suited for combat. But when you're doing jiu-jitsu, when you're doing judo, as I have and everything, you're training for being attacked by strikers. You're training for being attacked by kickers, for knives, all these things. A boxer's never seen this. I mean, they have
Yes.
no clue. So I think that's why it took so long for striking to get along. One of the reasons. So you kind of
I think one of
agree with
my,
that.
I'm very happy about the fact that. Can you hear me, Michael?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I think one of the things I'm proudest about as I look back on this is that 8 out of the 14 Hall of Fame, the UFC's pioneer wing, are people that I recruited and booked. People like Dan Severin, Mark Holman, Don Fry, Tito Ortiz, Maurice Smith, Sakuraba. I'm very proud of the fact that a whole generation of fighters came in, and a lot of wrestlers. I really wanted to bring the wrestlers in, and starting with Severin, and of course later on Couture, Mark Kerr. I brought in 2 Olympic gold medalists, Mark Schultz and Kevin Jackson. So I was always willing to mix it up in terms of bringing in fighters from different disciplines. And for that first show, I was insistent that we bring in a cruiserweight or a heavyweight pro boxer and a professional sumo wrestler. So I was always willing to go out there and look at martial that not everybody thought that maybe belonged in there, but I thought the fans would appreciate it. I thought the fans would say, well, what about, how come you never put a sumo wrestler in? So we did 3 times.
Yeah, you did. You definitely did, and we definitely appreciated it. And eventually, of course, it turned away from, the tournaments a little bit. Who made the first push? I know there was commissions that made pushes to make rules and stuff, and I had no idea that John McCarthy was involved in this as much as he was until a year ago. As long as I've been watching it, honestly, I thought he'd just been a ref. I didn't realize that he'd really been, on the ground with you guys.
John McCarthy started as a referee in UFC 2, and it wasn't the commissions that forced us. There were no commissions, or we weren't in states that had commissions. It was the media and the politicians. It was the governors, the senators, the mayors. They were the ones who put the pressure on us. The New York Times, Senator McCain. Starting in UFC 2 and 3, 2 things started to happen. Number one, the fighters started to cross-train. Number one, by UFC 3 and 4, Kimo Leopoldo was over at the Gracie Academy asking for jiu-jitsu lessons. So the fighters started to evolve the sport right away. And starting with UFC 3 in Charlotte, we knew we were going to have to add rules. So I started to write the rule books. I wrote 5 rule books, and the guy who helped me with the rule books was John McCarthy. McCarthy, I give a lot of credit to him being the conscience of the UFC, in some respects the moral center. As much as anybody, John McCarthy saw that for us to grow and to be eventually accepted, we were going to have to add more rules. By UFC 15, McCarthy and I had added 85-90% of the rules were adopted by the Unified Rules of MMA in 2001.
Wow. That's incredible. Yeah, actually, it obviously had to turn more into a sport. Some of the things I know that people said were ridiculous. Some of these politicians that had absolutely no idea what they were talking about. What's the most ridiculous lie, or I guess I'd say thing that you ever heard a politician say trying to vilify the UFC?
Well, probably, Michael, the most damaging was McCain writing a letter to the other 99 senators and telling them that the UFC was human cockfighting and to oppose it in every state that we approached. To, in effect, warn all the other senators in the U.S. Senate that this was a bad idea, and that as a former Navy boxer for the Naval Academy, that he felt that he was standing up for morality. The other comment I always resented and thought were silly was that they would defend the use of a glove, and anybody in the box I've ever recruited, including doctors and cutmen, will testify to the fact that the glove protects the hand, not the head. As Ken Shamrock once said, punching a guy in the head with a bare fist is like hitting a bowling ball. Invariably, you break the hand. Yet when you put that glove on a wrapped fist, tape, now that glove with sweat and water weighs 16, 14 ounces, you've got a padded club, and it allows you to hit the head and bounce the brain off the inside of the skull for a lot. So the glove is intrinsically more dangerous, and every politician who said that bare-knuckle fighting was barbaric just didn't know what they were talking about. They were talking about something that they were ignorant about.
Yeah, that had to be extremely frustrating, and I've never heard it. I've never been able to find it. Did you have? I'm sure you had some politicians or senators. Were there any of them that had common sense that kind of tried to push people and say, "Hey," knew a little more and said, "Hey, this isn't quite what you think it is," or were they pretty much all on board teaming against you?
Well, I think it was here's the lay of the land when it comes to that, Michael. Most of them weren't going to get involved because it wasn't enough of an issue that they could ride either way. You know, politicians are funny. If they've got a parade that they can get out in front of, then they get out in front of the parade and they get involved. But if they don't see any benefit to themselves, they kind of ignore it. Most politicians didn't do anything about this. In some cities we were in places like Puerto Rico, Detroit, Charlotte, you had local politicians, mayors and councilmen came out against it because maybe the local newspaper had written an editorial or an article calling it barbaric, quoting the New York Times. So increasingly, it was only a handful of politicians, and quite frankly, I don't remember anybody coming out in favor of it. Most politicians, if they didn't see a direct benefit to themselves, were not going to stick their neck out and promote something that was controversial. Unless they saw a benefit to them personally, they weren't going to get involved. McCain felt that this was an easy issue and that he would be standing up for morality. And, if you know anything about John McCain, he likes to see himself as a defender of public morality. And yet this is the guy who was at one point almost censured by the United States Senate for being one of the Keating Five, for supporting Keating, the head of a savings and loan that got convicted for fraud during the savings and loan scandal in the late 90s. So I always found it ironic that Senator John McCain used to paint himself as a voice for moral authority.
Well, I've also heard, and it might have been from a John McCarthy podcast I was listening to, I'm pretty sure that John McCain's wife had a relationship with Budweiser and possibly boxing, so maybe there was an ulterior motive there.
I've heard that as well. I heard that from a reporter in Arizona, that his wife was the daughter of a man who held major Budweiser distributorships west of the Mississippi, and that maybe he had an agenda there. I don't know that for a fact, but I do know that he was not constructive. Later on, when it became sanctioned and approved, he then backed off and said maybe, he never really apologized for his position, as many politicians won't do. They never want to admit they're wrong. But I was always proud about the fact, Michael, that I got the first state to sanction it. We got Mississippi to sanction it. Commissioner Billy Lyons, back in the day, became the first state, I believe it was UFC 14 or 15, that he finally came out and became the first state to officially sanction the sport of mixed martial arts in the UFC.
Well, God bless him. I'm glad he did. Obviously, that wasn't the last struggle that the UFC was gonna face, and you sold the UFC to SEG, I believe, somewhere in between UFC 5 and 9.
Between 5 and 6, it was in May of 1995. And then, Michael, I stayed on board for the next 2.5 years as the booker, matchmaker, and the commissioner of the Ultimate Fighting Alliance.
Well, you were the guy that knew the books, and some of the people, I'm amazed at some of the people that you were able to get in there, like no one had ever heard of. And I'll just name two guys. They just happened to have fought each other, but Tank Abbott and Oleg Tektarov. Nobody had heard of these guys, and I doubt anybody was recruiting Tank Abbott for much of anything.
Well, I was always looking for what I thought the fans would be interested in. And one of the things that was always in my mind was that I think if you had a black belt in karate, The guy that you were worried about running into in a bar was some big bouncer or a biker type who wasn't formally trained in martial arts but was strong as a bull and could punch. And that was Tank Abbott, a big bully. Tank became one of the most popular fighters that we ever had, along with Ken Shamrock. That's the truth. And Oleg Taktarov showed up on my doorstep one morning when I was coming into the office at Wild Promotions. He didn't speak English. He had a videotape showing fights that he had done in Russia and training that he had done for the special forces in the Russian army. And I had to get my brother-in-law to talk to him, a police officer in Carlsbad, California, because he spoke Russian. And that was the only way I was able to understand what he was telling me.
That's incredible. And I know he just, even until recently, a lot of the old school practitioners, they were not real big on the leg lock. So I've heard that maybe Rorion Grayson wasn't, and some of the Gracies weren't real hot on him because of the Sambo, the leg locks. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll tell you the true story on that is after I looked at the video that Oleg had, I called up Rorion, his office. So I said,
You're breaking up, Art. I think I lost you. I lost the audio here. Wow, this is I don't know why we're having so much issue with the audio here. Where are you? You're not in another country, right? No. Hello, Art.
Michael?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know why.
Fine.
Okay, good. Yeah, I don't know why we've been having so much issues, but I'm glad we're back now.
It sounds like you've got some internet connection problems.
Yeah, I hope not. Usually I am in a rural area, so maybe I have had some here. I apologize for that. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, I really apologize for that. But as we were talking about, Oleg Taktarov was the last thing we were talking about, and relationship with Gracie.
Well, what I did after I spoke to Rorion, I put Oleg in UFC 5, and then he came back in UFC 6 and won the whole tournament in Casper, Wyoming. So I see from the videotapes that this guy knew what he was doing. And again, it was a style that I felt we needed to put in the UFC. We needed to get a Sambo guy who knew how to do leg and ankle locks. If the Gracies weren't interested in doing that, I was going to put a style in there that was.
And that's still one of my favorite fights to this day was Tank Abbott and Oleg Taktarov. And I'll admit, I was a big Tank Abbott fan. You know, I mean, I was a young teenager. I liked the brassness of him, that I don't, give a damn kind of attitude and everything. And just, I think that Colorado air, that partially, and of course Tank Abbott, I mean, he didn't look like a super athlete. He had a beer gut. He was, he was a biker guy. I think he did kind of run out of gas there, but yeah, I was happy for all of there.
Very strong. He was very strong. I saw him do a bench press with 605 for 3 reps.
3 reps, wow. I had heard that he had done 600. I didn't realize for 3 reps at 605. That's incredible.
Yeah, very, very strong. Could pick a guy up and throw him out of the octagon. I think in the ultimate, I think he wanted to throw Cal Worsham, the ex-Marine, out of the octagon, and John McCarthy stopped him.
I remember him getting somebody up in the air. I couldn't remember who it was, but I was like, oh man, what is going to happen here?
Yeah,
And
Tank was. By the way, when the producers of the TV show Friends wanted to do an episode that featured the Ultimate Fighting Championship, we sent two fighters to New York for them to take a look at. One was Vitor Belfort, who was looking great in those days at 220 pounds, and we sent Tank Abbott. Well, the guy who convinced the producer that he was the right one to put in the show was Abbott. When they interviewed him, Tank spit his plate, that his false front teeth and his upper teeth, he spit it out at the producer. And the producer was so impressed and shocked that they called us up and said, "We're putting Abbott in." Abbott said, "Send the other guy home."
that's great. Well, I mean, he just seemed like a natural actor. I've only seen, I mean, I've been watching mixed martial arts. Just it's ridiculous how obsessed I am with it. But in the entire time I've watched with it, I can only think of two guys that I really think and watch their faces, and it looked like they had joy in hurting other people or hitting other people, and that was Vanderlei Silva and Tank Abbott.
You're right about that, Michael. Abbott really loved it. He got off on it. You're right. That's what you saw in his face was real. Exactly.
Well, I remember him on, excuse my language, I remember one of the interviews, and we thought this was the greatest thing in the world as teenagers after the knockout. They were showing the replay, and he says, "You're going to have to turn that off, excuse me." He says, he might have said something more vulgar, but he said, "You're turning me on." And I just thought that was the most hilarious thing.
Yes. He said it was better than sex. He used to say, hitting people is better than sex. Abbott was a star. There's no doubt about it. And he sold a lot of tickets for us. Absolutely.
Yeah. Any idea where in the world that guy is? Have you talked to him in years?
I've talked to some people who've talked to him. He's still down in Huntington Beach. I heard he had some health problems, but I haven't spoken to him in a while, so I don't know. But he had a little bit of a run in wrestling. He was with the WWE for a short time. And, he never went back to fighting again, professionally. But I think he was one of the great stars of the early UFC.
Yeah, I definitely think he was. I mean, I wish he would have taken some of the training maybe more seriously. I know he did eventually get some more formal boxing training, which I really thought he was going to beat Don Fry. I mean, he was doing very well in that fight until he slipped. And not that Don Fry may not have won it otherwise, but he fell off balance. And Don Fry, I believe, sunk a choke in there and submitted him.
Well, Tank had been doing some boxing training at that point with Eddie Stanky, who had been training Belfort and was responsible for a lot of the training for Oscar De La Hoya. So he came out throwing not roundhouse punches, but straight punches, and it rocked Fry. It rocked Fry back on his heels. But Don recovered, and up there in the Denver air, he had more stamina, and he was able to prevail. That was a great fight for us. That was the second year that a guy with a great mustache had won the Ultimate. The previous year was Dan Severn, and that Ultimate 96 was Don the Predator Fry.
Yeah, that guy might have had one of the best personalities ever. I mean, it looked like he should have been a Magnum PI with what's his name. Even his videos he's done on himself. He was doing those videos on YouTube with the cigar in his mouth. The guy's just hilarious. I love watching him. He's one of the most entertaining guys I think that I've ever seen.
For a while, he was the face of the UFC and a good one. He had a great personality. He's got a voice like Sam Elliott. He's got one of those movie star voices that you can't invent a voice like that. It sounds like the Marlboro Man. He is the Marlboro Man.
Yeah, I think he's one of the toughest SOBs to ever live, honestly. And I know he's had some issues with his back. I heard he had like 13 vertebrae worked on, and that was so. I hope he's doing a little better now. I haven't heard in the last couple of years.
I did an interview with MMA Junkie on Monday of this week on their radio show, and the guy who called in to congratulate me was Don Fry, and we had a lot of fun talking and sharing about the old days. Don remembers that at UFC 11, he was in the stands, and when we got to the end of that event, I had no one to oppose Mark Coleman. Scott Ferrozzo in the semifinals had gotten gassed in beating Tank Abbott, but he couldn't go forward. So I had nobody to face Mark Coleman. So I went over to Don Fry, and I said, I got $50,000 in my pocket. Would you get up there and fight him now? And Don tells the story, and he told it the other day on MMA Junkie. He said, Art had suspended me a couple of months before for something I did. I was pissed at him. He said, I turned him down. He said, but I should have taken that fight. I have kicked myself in the butt for the last 20 years to take that fight. He said,
oh my gosh.
A career. We talked about it the other day on.
Oh, fuck. Excuse me, sorry about the and I apologize again. I've never had internet issues like this. Of course, it would be my best guess I've ever had. I'm hoping that's the last one. I apologize for that again, Art.
Oh, no problem.
So yeah, we're getting back to, I guess it was we were talking about Don Fry, and you offered him a fight in the stands when you didn't have anybody to fight.
Yeah, we finally wound up ending that night by doing an exhibition between Kevin Randleman and Mark Coleman to have something to fill up the time. But it was what, and you asked about the tournament. By UFC 3, I starting to become aware that the problem with the tournament format was that if you have to fight 3 different opponents in one night, the potential for injury is very great, and a lot of times it left you without the best fighter being able to be there in the finals. So, but we found out that the tournament, which was my original idea, had a basic problem, and fighting 3 guys in one night put a lot of physical pressure on the winners and the losers. How about Royce Gracie, who in UFC 2 fought 4 bouts in a 16-man tournament?
Yeah, that was absolutely insane. And then, of course, we ended up with Steve Jenham, which a lot of guys might not even recognize who he is. Ended up being the champ, I believe, of UFC 3 after Royce couldn't come back after fighting chemo. Was that 3?
That was UFC 3. I had when Royce couldn't come out and fight, and his family threw the towel in, it became a forfeit. And now we had Ken Shamrock. I needed him to move forward. And without being able to fight Royce, he basically told his father in the dressing room, I'm not going to do it. So now I've got nobody to fight Harold Howard. Steve Jenham, who had been an alternate, had gotten dressed. He took a shower and got dressed, and he was out in the parking lot. I ran out in the parking lot looking for him, found him, yelled at him to get his gi back on and get back inside because I needed him to face Harold Howard in the final. And he came in as a police officer from Omaha, Nebraska, an expert in ninjutsu, and won the $60,000 with one fight. After that, if you were going to be an alternate in the UFC, I decided we had to match you up early on, so at least you would have gotten sweaty and gotten some exercise and be prepared to face a fighter who had also maybe gone through 1 or 2 bouts. Make it more fair.
Yeah, I think that was a great way to start to build new talent too. I remember watching, and it might have just been on the VHS tapes that we rented where they would show the alternate bouts, but I remember watching that, and back then I didn't care who was fighting. I'm still kind of like that. I'm the freak fan. I'll watch all 14 fights every damn time that the UFC's on. But do you think that there is that there can be too much fighting right now, though? Do you think there's an oversaturation right now?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question, Michael?
Do you think that there's such thing as too much fighting? As many fights that are on right now, do you think there can be an issue with oversaturation?
Well, I think that's true with any product that you're marketing, is that you have to match the amount of product to the amount of customers. So it could be that maybe we have a little oversupply of fights, but then again, the fans will tell us by voting with their dollars and by what they're watching if we have too much or not.
Yeah, that's very true. One of the things you mentioned that I can't remember who it was. You said that in the UFC that works with Fight Pass. Could you tell me again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, my contact that I had the longest relationship with over at the UFC is in charge of Fight Pass and the Hall of Fame.
Wow, I love Fight Pass. I have it. I mean, I watch as much as I can of it. Watching those old fights, it's great. I was very surprised when they came out with the numbers. They finally released some numbers for the first time. I was really surprised that the numbers were as low as they were. I think about 460,000 members. I know you're friends with the guy, but would you give him any advice? Do you think the UFC is promoting that as much as they could be?
Well, I think that you can expect they're going to be doing more. They're going to do a lot of old school stuff. You're going to see a lot more franchises presented. Their competition in that business, if you think about it, is the WWE, a publicly traded company, and their announced number of 724 subscribers is 1.9 million. But when you think about the fact that there are about 450,000 subscribers on the UFC, that represents one of the most significant after pay-per-view and TV licensing. I believe Fight Pass might be the number 3 event that generates revenue. If you've got 450,000 people that are paying $10 a month, that's over $48 million a year.
Well, that is a lot of money, definitely. I just maybe it's just because I'm so hardcore. I expected to have, more people involved in it. I want to talk to you a little bit more about your thoughts as the UFC moved along. Also, even as the Fertitta brothers owned it and Dana White pushed them before the Ultimate Fighter and before the Stephan Bonnar versus Forrest Griffin fight. Do you think the UFC moves on to what it did without that fight? How big was that fight?
Oh, no, that fight was crucial. In fact, I had lunch with Forrest Griffin came over to my table when I was at the UFC last week, and we were talking, and that fight was a major breakthrough. It exposed the UFC to a much larger audience. Zuffa did a great job in bringing MMA at the UFC to a larger audience by getting onto Spike and then later getting onto Fox. That Bonnar Forrest Griffin fight was one of the great watershed moments in the UFC and the sports history, no doubt about it. They did a good job of expanding the reach of the show and the show's appeal to fans. I was at Mandalay Entertainment at the time, and I was pitching a show called Fight Quest. The Ordinary Joes coached by the pros. But my problem was we had sold the UFC to the Fertitta brothers, and they had the show, the UFC, and I had an idea that I was going to develop for TV, but I didn't have it yet up on its hind legs. So they went with Tough, the Ultimate Fighter, and it became a big success. In fact, the executive that I was pitching, Craig Borsari, Zuffa finally hired him and brought him in as an executive over at the UFC. Life is very strange, and it's funny who you meet going up and coming back.
Well, it seems like when you work hard and you're persistent and you put yourself out there, in the positions, and around the right people, you get lucky, as some people would say, a lot more than other people. And I want to compliment you for being so easy to get a hold of. Some of these guys, it's like you got to talk to this guy and talk to this handler to talk to this handler. Do you think that just your openness to any opportunity played a huge role in your success?
Oh, you're exactly right, Michael. I think that you can't lose sight of two things if you're in this business. You can't lose sight of the fans, and you have to be supportive of them and connected with them. I'll talk to any fan who still wants to talk to me, and I'm no longer promoting. And the other group that you have to pay close attention to are the journalists, the people who cover this, who do it for podcasts and radio and television and print. You know, they're communicating the message. They're communicating perceptions about the sport. So any good journalist who calls me and wants my opinion, would like to interview me, I welcome the opportunity. That's good for all of us.
Well, that's great. And, you know, I will say something I've learned through this. I've interviewed some UFC fighters. The only current UFC fighter I've interviewed was Sam Alvey. Super nice guy. I don't know if you know him, Smiling Sam Alvey. And then I interviewed some guys that had been around. Shoney Carter, of course, I've got to know him over the years. Just a great, great guy and great personality. But I noticed the people that worked hard, that you think these guys are the ones that made it and may not be as approachable, are the most approachable. And then there's guys that I've tried to get on. It's like, hey, you know, this guy's coming up. He could help me, but I'd like to give him as much of a chance to help me as, you know, as he would help him as much as he would help me. And a lot of these guys, I'm too busy. I don't have time. And I mean, I know they are really busy, but sometimes I think it's just that extra 10%.
Yeah, in my opinion, you're never too busy to talk to a reporter. If you start to assume that attitude, I think you're on your way out. You just don't know it. It's just not smart thinking. It's not smart.
Yeah, I'm surprised how many guys that are trying to get into Bellator and the UFC, and I've talked to them and contacted them. Sometimes not just me. I do it through a conduit. I don't know if you probably never met him. His name's Ian Brewster. He used to be the COO of the biggest league in Canada, and I can't believe the name of the league slips my mind right now, but I've been friends with him for about 10 years. So he knows a ton of fighters. Ian Brewster, he's actually now a formal consultant to the country of Canada, and but just a super humble guy. And now I can't remember the name, because Shoney fought over there. So many guys. Carlos Newton fought over there, and hopefully I'll remember it. Hopefully before I get through this.
It's not Loudon Owen, is it?
No, it's Ian Brewster was the CEO.
Oh, I know Ian Brewster.
Okay,
I know Ian Brewster.
Yeah.
Oh, good guy. Yeah.
Super good guy.
Good guy.
Yeah, he's probably one of the most principle-bound people I've ever met, and just talk to anybody. Yeah, he's introduced me to several fighters before I kind of got the courage to go out and talk to people on my own, and he'll still push people through. He introduced me to Pete Spratt, and I had Marcus Davis, Marcus the Irish Hand Grenade Davis. I don't know if you've ever talked to him from season 4. Great down-to-earth guy.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I've talked to him, but I know Shoney Carter, and Shoney's a great guy. I like Shoney a lot.
Yeah, I think some people would get a different perception about him, and he's like, we met when I was doing, and this was years back, I was doing a small, basically blog. It was about as big as websites got at the time. It was called FightFanBlog.com, and Shoney Carter had signed on. That's how I met Ian Brewster, actually, too. And Shoney Carter barely knows me, invites me out to Chicago for dinner, and take my family to dinner, and the most incredible guy, and he'd give you, as much time as possible, just like you. I'm just amazed how humble a lot of these fighters are, and maybe a lot of that comes from jiu-jitsu and just the the discipline of martial arts.
Yeah. Yes.
What do you think is the next step, though, for the UFC? What do you think they need to do right now? They have 700 fighters, and you got one promoter. You got Dana White. I think he's one of the greatest promoters ever. But you got 700 fighters now. You can't promote them all.
No, again, I think that you have to remember that they have developed a very big and powerful machine to find stars, and they've lost some stars. Rousey's now over in wrestling, and Conor McGregor's future is cloudy. John Jones' future is cloudy. So I think what they will continue to do, and with their Performance Institute in terms of training and development, they're looking for tomorrow's stars. I think you're also going to see a big emphasis on developing other parts of the world. The UFC is the premier brand in the sport, and they are truly really the only international brand in a sense. I think you're going to see them make some strong inroads over the next 5 years into India and China. Remember how many people are in those two markets that potentially are not only good fighters, but great fans. So I think you're going to see an international expansion over the next 5 years that will be very impressive. I think that's on the horizon for the UFC and the sport.
Definitely, and you talk about star power, and obviously that's one of the big things. And I get into not a lot of arguments, but discussions with a lot of guys because I do a lot of live streams. I do one show on Thursday where it's just, me and the fans talk about the weekly news and things and stuff. And there's so much frustration from a lot of them, I'll say, with Conor McGregor, and that's before the recent incidents. And they want to see the best fight the best. And I try to tell them, I said, I want to see that too. But at the end of the game, it's entertainment. And I like to say, I said, I want to see the best fight the best. But at the end of the day, sometimes you got to take the pretty girl to the prom. And that
Right.
you got to give the people who they want. And however you feel about a guy like Conor McGregor, and of course Ronda was there too. I mean, you can't take your eyes off him. And
That's correct.
I
It's
hope
all about finding stars. Somewhere in those 700 fighters are a couple of stars. I mean, that's how it works out, and that's true in football. That's true in basketball. That's true in every major sport. What you're looking for are the Michael Jordans. You're looking for the LeBron James, the Magic Johnsons, the Larry Birds, the Mickey Mantles. You're looking for the stars. And I think that the UFC has got the greatest machine in the world to find stars, period.
in your mind, who's the Michael Jordan, who's the Babe Ruth of the UFC? If you go through, could you name somebody that you think this is, if you had to rank like fighters 1 through 10, is there a number one?
Well, I'll tell you something very interesting I'll share with you. One day I'm having lunch with John McCarthy about 6 months ago, and he said to me, Art, you have to remember that Royce Gracie was UFC 1.0. I said, okay. I said, where are you going with this? He said, Mark Coleman was UFC 2.0. He said, when you brought in that wrestler and he developed the ground and pound technique and style, the UFC had moved to the next level. It had evolved. And I think that's very interesting. I think when you look at, the Mickey Mantles of this world, baseball, the Babe Ruths, the Willie Mays, you've got to say that Royce Gracie and Mark Coleman are two seminal figures in the history of the UFC. You'd have to say maybe Marco Ruas, maybe being one of the first fighters to be a complete fighter, having Muay Thai kicking skills and jiu-jitsu skills. You'd have to say Maurice Smith is a seminal figure. He became the first striker to beat a major grappler, Mark Coleman.
Yeah, absolutely. You go back to Marco Ruas, and you go back to that quote, and this is going to sound weird about Tank Abbott, saying, take that replay off. I'm kind of getting turned on here. I got to tell you, the first time I seen Marco Ruas stop Paul Varelans with those leg kicks,
Yes.
it was a different kind of turned on, but I had never seen anything like that. My adrenaline just had to have been, at the very top. I just thought that was absolutely incredible. And I remember hearing
Absolutely. In a sense, skills, have the jiu-jitsu skills. And he, in a sense, started to move the arrow towards what we ended up with Don Fry, where Don had done 7 professional boxing matches, had a judo background. You started to see this cross-trained fighter becoming very important in the development of the sport. So, we had a great time back in the day in bringing these guys on board. These guys who basically changed the flow and the direction of what this was and what it became.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always been those stars, and I hear guys, now, and I'm sure you hear it. Oh, Connor's gone, Ronda's gone. Like you talked about, John Jones is gone. Oh, the UFC is in a slump. And you think about different eras, like the era you just talked about. I would go back to the era of light heavyweights a few years back. What would the UFC been if Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture, and Tito Ortiz
Yes,
had not all been great all at the same time? I mean, that was saving
yes,
grace.
absolutely, absolutely. And I'm proud about the fact that I recruited both Randy and Tito, but I just missed bringing in Chuck Liddell. He came in after I was gone, and I knew about him. He was training over at Nick Blomgren's gym here in Vegas, One Kick Nick. So you look at the great era right there. That's a good point, Michael. Ortiz, Liddell, and UFC is some wonderful. The UFC.
Hello? Hello? Hello, Art. Hello, Art. Can you hear me? Okay. I think I figured out what one of my issues was, and sorry about that. I'd never had that before. I think I had I think I had a malfunction, a speaker malfunction. So sorry about that, but okay. Where we were at there. Sorry about that. Lost my train of thought a little bit there, but
We have been on an hour, and I do have another call coming up. Is there a big final question that you wanted to ask me, Michael?
yeah. What is in the future for you right now? I know you were doing ARM-X. We've talked about the movie. Is there anything else? And please, I'm going to plug your book because it's absolutely incredible. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the fans right now, or let them know what's in store in the future with you?
Well, X-Arm, we pulled the plug on X-Arm in 2012. That was a project brought to me by a production company in Seattle. We're very excited about the film that is now in development, and based on the book, we think that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm also right now working, and have been so for the last 10 months, on a novel about Polydamas, the Hydratian champion in 408 BC. I mentioned him in my book, Is This Legal? And I'm working on a novel based on his life from 2,400 years ago when he was the king of the world. He was the first superstar of MMA. The name of the novel is Demigod, and we're very excited about it. Hopefully I'll have it written completely by the end of the year, and my agent will take it to a major publisher. I think it'll make a great movie.
Well, I hope so. And like I said, anybody who hasn't bought your book, I want to tell them, anybody who hasn't bought Is This Legal? It's one of the favorite books I've ever read. Please go out and buy it. Look for Art Davie's movie. Congratulations on your induction into the Hall of Fame on July 5th, and I couldn't be more gracious for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Let me make, I guess, a final plug since you've given me that opportunity. Anybody that wants to know more about the book or to acquire the book, please go to isthislegal.thebook.com, and you'll be able to buy the book there, either in hardcover, autographed or not, or as an ebook. And again, soon to be a major motion picture. I want to thank you, Michael, for your time today and your interest in this old fossil and my story. and it's been a pleasure. I look forward to doing something more with you in the future, and I'm excited about the fact that you've got a great title for your podcast, Fights with Friends, which I think is a good name. I like that.
Well, thank you very much. That's one of the best compliments that I could ever get. That means a lot to me.
Well, you have a good day, my friend, and we'll talk to you again soon. Keep punching out there.
All right, you too. Thank you very much. Have a great one. All right, guys. Of course, that was, for those of you that are still around, the reason that we're all here every week, the reason that MMA exists in the United States, basically, definitely legalized MMA. Anybody that's still here, yes, is thisbooklegal.com. I'm going to put that in the description so you guys can go to that too. I'd wondered why I couldn't find it on Amazon for a while. It took me a little while, and I'm looking forward to him getting that audio book going. I know he'll be on it, and he's got a great voice for an audio book. He's one of those guys you could just sit and listen to all day. And I know he's super busy. He's been on MMA Junkie. He's been on radio shows and podcasts just all over the place these last couple weeks. For him to be on mine is just very humbling. He came to me and, said, hey, I had approached him, and he's like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it this week. We might have to wait till next week to be able to do this. And I said, okay, you let me know whenever you're able to do it, I'll make time. And he said 11 a.m. today, and my boss was good enough. He actually let me leave today. I wasn't about to ask him to give me a different time. Founder of the UFC making time for me. But yeah, what a great guy. I'll put the link down below to his new book. I can't wait for the new movie to come out, and I encourage you to study more about him. This guy, he's a marketing genius. It was good to be able to pick his brain and hear some of those old great stories and stuff. Some people are historians. They love watching the History Channel and the Vikings, and I love that too. But to me, the history of the UFC and the history of his fighting and how everything came about is as interesting as any and all of that. So thank you for watching this. Those that watch this later on DVR, I'm sorry I had a couple sound cutouts. We'll get that, and a couple Skype cutouts. So I think the sound cutout was definitely on my part. I apologize for that. I am getting that fixed tonight. That will never happen to me again. But this is definitely going in the archives, and I'll cut up the best parts of this too, make some separate videos, and like he said, he'd be back in the future. I am truly inspired. I'm so grateful for you guys that are there. Cap, obviously my moderator. Those of you that are here in and out every week. I know this is a hard time to watch this, but as you watch this later, I hope you give me your comments. There's times that, you struggle doing this. You struggle. I always enjoy watching the fights, and I always enjoy spending time with you guys. But sometimes I get to an end of a week, and I put in 20, 30 hours on this. Thank you, Zoltan. Thanks for showing up. I hope you were able to watch the whole show. If not, hope you watch the interview later, and thank you for sticking with me for so long. You and Cap were two of the very first members. You were probably the first constant, actually, Zoltan. Savannah Bozeman. What's sad, Savannah? Yes, you did. You were one of the very first subscribers when I switched over to Fights with Friends. Of course, I had a channel before. It was called Mike Reviews It All, and I was doing MMA things on this. And I was doing some things that I had some interest in, but this was always where my heart was. And when I did a few MMA things, and I started to connect with people, I, you know, I said, this is where I need to go. This is where my passion is, whether I make money at it or not. I really enjoy this. I need to do, my part in sharing this with the world. And this is something I wanted to mention to Mr. Davie, Art Davie. They've talked about the UFC from the beginning of time. All these guys have talked about, people are going to die inside the cage. This is going to be horrible for humanity. What's this going to do to our children? Yada, yada, yada. Nobody's died inside the cage. Nobody's ever died inside the cage. Since 1993, countless people have died in boxing and football and baseball and basketball, in even high school wrestling, every sport you can think of. But the UFC. Now I want you guys to think about all the fighters, all the people that have came through this, the fighters, the fight fans. Some of us are a little different than the people you run into every day. Not everybody likes to sit for 3 hours and watch people get punched in the face or get armbarred or get submitted or whatever. But what the UFC did and what this MMA has done, as I believe, is it took a lot of kids off the street that probably would have been adopted by gangs. They could have been lifelong criminals. You gotta, at the end of the day, you got to find a way to make money. Some of these guys, they had struggled very hard with working a 9-to-5 job. They're impulsive. I can speak to that. I can be a pretty impulsive person. They don't always think as much as the rest of us or rest of some people before they do some things. And Art just went out. He found these colorful guys, these guys that basically he was keeping a lot of them out of jail. And how Tank Abbott stayed out of jail, I'm sure Art Davie had a hell of a lot to do with that for many years. Because that guy's conduct outside of the cage, he got into so many wars. And as I've told my own personal story, I said, judo came into our high school. I found out it was coming in about halfway through our freshman year, that it was going to be in sophomore year. And it was also my math and Spanish teacher. And I found he was going to teach judo, and I was about ready to drop out of school already. I'd been in 4 fights through about 1 semester of high school, and they called me into the principal's office. And 4 fights, he says, that's a lot. And when you fight, you don't care who's around. You're not even smart about it. You're fighting in the mess hall, and you got 300 kids cheering on. We can't have this. We can't have this. I wasn't a good smack talker. Someone would say something to me, and a lot of times I'd just hit them, or I would make them so mad that they would do something to me, and then I knew it was game on. And I didn't have the skills then, but I was a street fighter. I was a decent fighter. Judo gave me that discipline and a reason to come to school. No way in hell I would have ever stuck around in high school and graduated. If it wasn't for judo and it wasn't for a guy named Oscar Garnica, a guy who's now a 7th degree judo black belt, one of the highest ranked judokan on this side of the Mississippi. But, I might not have ever gotten into that or even been excited if I hadn't seen the UFC. So, like I said, I think this is a guy that he literally changed the world. I know he changed my life, a lot of my friends' lives, my circle of friends, and I'm eternally grateful for him. Like I said, I thank him for being on this interview, and this was just, I hope you guys had as much fun as I did. I could almost do this thing. I could definitely do this thing, not even record it. I would love to talk to this guy and just sit down with him for hours and hours. This is the best part of this job. But as I was going before, sometimes I do get discouraged in this. You spend 20, 30 hours a week, and the YouTube revenue being what it is right now, there's weeks where I'm not trying to complain, but I kind of am. You literally only make a couple dollars. And I've worked 20, 30 weeks, and my ad revenue comes in for the week, and I mean, it's like $4 or $5 sometimes. Some weeks are better than others, but it's definitely not for the money. At this point, there's not much money to be made after a year. I've definitely spent way more just on equipment and different things than I've made off of this. But those words of encouragement for him are going to push me through the next year. I know they are. Words of encouragement from somebody like that. It's undescribable, the inspiration that comes from that. Well, thank you, Mike D. I thought I could have done a little better. I thought I was a little more prepared for the interview. Having a few issues with Skype and the sound threw me off a little bit. But, man, he's such a great interview, and he kept me on track a couple times. African Speech, you were doing the Bell VMS Hugh fight. It's a massive fight. The Bell VMS Hugh fight. Send me a link to African Speaker. Do you have a link on here? Because I'm not quite sure what you're talking about. If you don't mind leaving me a link in the comments, I would appreciate it, and I will check it out. Everybody, don't forget, though, Canelo Alvarez is out, of course, for the Cinco de Mayo fight, but Triple G, Gennady Golovkin, is in, and he'll be fighting on HBO. I'll be doing a fight companion on Saturday for that fight, for the Cinco de Mayo fight. Bell versus Hay. Okay. I got you now. I just couldn't read it before. Okay. Yeah, no, I definitely plan on doing that one. I don't remember the exact time and date. And I'm going to do a better job of releasing my monthly schedule. I released an April schedule. It's May 4th. I'm going to work on releasing a schedule for this month here soon. So I got to get back to work. Thank you guys so much for coming into this interview. Thank you again to Mr. Davie, the creator of this thing we call the UFC, this beautiful, loving, caring, violent art that we all know and love. And you guys have a great day. As always, I love you, I respect you, and I'll see your fine asses tomorrow.